Truth be told, I wasn't super familiar with this band before getting ready to do this episode with them for the Behind the Screams podcast here, but I am so excited that this came across my desk and I got an opportunity to have such a cool and great conversation with Aaron Bruno from the Barbarians of California. You may know his other work with AWOLNATION. He's the mastermind behind that. And we had such a killer conversation about the differences between songwriting between these two things, everything that he's put into in terms of that hardcore edge that the Barbarians have, this amazing tour that they just got off of with Deftones after an incredible year that band has had as well, and about heavy and intense music and making sure that we don't take this too seriously. And that being said, having fun with things all the way down to the names of your songs. For example, the most recent song that the Barbarians of California just put out recently is titled, and I quote, "Pseudo-intellectuals are hating on my band, parentheses, pure power," featuring the mighty Keith Buckley as the guest vocalist on that song. Really awesome. I've really enjoyed listening to all of the songs that this band has put out, especially on this new record that came out recently too, and now I'm just gnashing my teeth. I had an amazing time taking the dive into the material here, getting ready for my conversation with Bruno, and we talk about so many exciting things as well in terms of his artistic expression, his vocal approach in the studio and live, and just what it means to keep this kind of music honest and authentic. Very excited here on the Behind the Screams podcast to be welcoming here Aaron Bruno from the Barbarians of California and known for AWOLNATION as well. Nice to meet you officially. How are you doing today?
Nice to meet you too. Doing pretty good.
Hell yeah. And we're going to talk about a lot of cool stuff because it looks like you've been incredibly busy this past year with the launch of what this band is, releasing the album, and now I'm just gnashing my teeth, this new single, Modern Fashion, and the amount of touring and festival spots you've had recently. And first and foremost, how was this absolutely gargantuan tour with Deftones?
It was wonderful. It was, dare I say, short of the demand of the musicians in the band, it was quite easy. And what I mean by that is that the audience was so open to hearing a heavier sound. And there was everybody, the demographic was people like you or me, all the way to, 16-year-olds going in the mosh pit for the first time. And I suppose I just always assumed with the Barbarians that we would be playing for a bunch of snobby music fans, in a lot of ways. But it was quite the opposite. So it was just such a wonderful experience. And I knew I had the crowd if a pit broke out in the first song. And 9 out of 10 shows, 9 times out of 10, I'd say, metaphorically, of course, that happened. And sometimes multiple pits. And so it was just, when I say it's easy, what I mean by that really is that that Deftones have such an incredible crowd. So it was wonderful.
That's great to hear, and especially knowing what you're doing musically with this band and this project, kind of hearing it from the first note, the energy is so, like, for lack of a better word, just ferocious. It's great, and I can imagine a lot of pits breaking out to this. I can imagine this kind of material is a lot of fun to start to get back into performing again, since I know this is something stylistically that you're not new to necessarily because you've done this before. How is it returning to this kind of aggression live and this more hardcore edge to things?
When I was 18, basically 16 to, let's say, 20, I was in a hardcore band and a punk band before the hardcore band. And so I got a glimpse of what it was like to play for an energetic, I don't want to use the word violent, but an energetic, hyped crowd response. But on a very small level, my band Insurgents, we'd play for, anywhere from 5 people to maybe 100 if we were really lucky, opening up for a bigger band. And I got to see, little hints and tastes of a big physical reaction, let's say. But nothing like this. So it was really just remarkable to see people. When you write big, like when you attempt to write big, aggressive songs, at least for me, in my head, my dream is that the crowd reacts physically to the way that, the songs feel emotionally to me to release to them. And that happened on that tour. And it's happened at, we're batting 1,000 with the Barbarians of California, in that each show has gone off. Right. And I remember being a kid going to a show, whether it was to see Snapcase Hours Away or Refused, and thinking like, I hope it goes off, we would always say, meaning stage dives, sing-alongs, slam dancing, pits, circle pits, whatever, and everything in between. And so far, I'm so spoiled that each Barbarian show has had that, from the Troubadour to playing in Buffalo and Chicago, and then the Deftones tour, and then some of these festivals. Each show has had a physical reaction, and because I thought with the AWOL stuff, it's a whole different world. We could talk as much about that as you like, but it wouldn't be that fun to play these aggressive tracks, especially vocally, if people were just watching. And the same goes for AWOLNATION in a lot of ways, but there's more of that. And I've become accustomed to playing nice melodies for people to sing along to. But with Barbarians, I hope it's physical. And if it's not, then I would feel like it was a letdown. And so far, we're batting 1,000.
That's awesome. And it must have felt really cool to walk into and be a part of such a big tour, but you're getting to play all new material the entire time. It's not like there's anything that's existed for years and years and years. So to be able to get that kind of reaction from songs that people are only just getting accustomed to now is a big testament to those ideas. They do hit, to put it that way too, which is awesome. And I can imagine that feels great.
It did. And yeah, you're right. I would look out into the crowd and think, oh, this works. Great. So for those ears out there to hear this aggressive music, we have been accepted.
And speaking of that kind of aggressiveness, especially compared to other things that you do, it must be a really cool thing on the vocal front to kind of balance out now, like the amount of more aggressive, distorted vocals and things on the screaming side of things with this. And since I know, again, you do have a history with some of this stuff in your past, I was really curious, like, is screaming and these much more aggressive vocals something you've been playing around with on your own these past years, or was this record and these past few releases kind of your first dive into things vocally this demanding in a while?
Definitely in a while, but with AWOLNATION stuff, I would always lean a little more heavy and aggressive vocally over the years. Through my travels and touring. And I was very lucky that, just to back up a little bit with my hardcore band Insurgents in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was more like Barbarians. I think I've gotten much better since then. But I was only screaming in that band. And then I started to, so my order vocally has been somewhat backwards, I think. I started as a screamer. Then in my early 20s, I wanted to get more into melody and grow. I think a lot of people walk away from the hardcore scene or walk away from heavy music. I just love all genres of music. So in my early 20s, I started another band called Hometown Hero, where I, tried to write melody and get into music that I guess a wider variety of people could enjoy. And that was just where I was at in my life. I was kind of, growing out of only a specific genre, which was the hardcore scene. So I started singing and I tried to get better at using my voice. Very scared, of course, because I find that it's easier to hide behind a scream than it is to sing your with a melody, you know.
Yeah.
And so just jumping into the deep end of being completely vulnerable, it's sort of like, okay, check out my journal, you know, read it. I hope you like it. I hope you like who I am. And it was a scary thing to do. But falling in love with, you know, I always loved Nirvana. I loved Michael Jackson growing up in the 80s, Prince, and everything in between. And then falling in love with the Jeff Buckley Grace record was a big deal to me because, and even with Prince, because when I was younger, I played a lot of sports, grew up in the 80s, right? And if I would sing high, let's say, you know, in my falsetto, my bro friends around me in sports would make fun of me and, you know, and say like, you sound ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. But I always had a comfort level singing in my falsetto way before I learned how to use my chest voice or just my regular sort of voice, right? So all that to be said, I started screaming, you know, in the beginning of playing in front of people. Then in my early 20s, I thought, okay, I feel comfortable in my falsetto, but I got to get better at singing in my regular chest voice because you can't, you know, you can't really live and die only in your falsetto. I mean, some people can, I suppose, but that wasn't my route. So then I kind of learned how to sing and carry a melody and figure out, you know, where the top of my range is, where I'm sort of distorting or maxing out, like in the ways I love John Lennon and Kurt Cobain, let's say. But then in comes Jeff Buckley and my love for Prince that made me feel, okay, it's okay to sing extremely high and you know, tap into the feminine part of my vocal. And that ended up being very liberating too. And so I kind of tried to do everything. And then so that band ended up getting a record deal, Hometown Hero. And then that fell on its face. A lot of disappointment after all the hope in the world. So kind of reinvented myself and got more into a bit of a what I suppose I would call, you know, like an indie sort of disco thing. In the mid 2000s, I suppose if you were to really compare it, someone would say it's something like Foster the People meets Maroon 5, but hopefully cooler than Maroon 5, I would hope, you know, although they do have some nice songs. And, you know, another record deal that crashed and burned. And then I think I was holding back the aggressive vocal sound for a long time because, you know, by default, I probably assumed that it was immature because it came from my high school days. And then now I'm heading into, you know, sorry, my dentist.
No problem.
Which is very fitting, actually, if you think about it. So now I'm heading into, you know, 30s right around the corner, my age, and I got nothing now, and I'm in debt, credit card debt, the whole sob story, you know, of rock and roll, right? And then at this point, I'm thinking, well, none of this has worked, so fuck it, I'll just do it all, and I'll bring all the aspects of vocals into this because no one can tell me what to do or not. So then here comes AWOLNATION with where I wasn't afraid to use my more aggressive, dirty vocal and scream a little bit, but kind of incorporate. You got the rock stuff, the disco stuff, and you know the aggressive vocal that I started in, all coming together for AWOL, which ended up being that first record. So that's that story, right? And then cut to 5 albums down the line, then I found success that I never thought I'd have in a million years. At least to this degree. So then now cut to the lockdowns. So I have a new album that comes out. All right. So it's time to make AWOL album number 5 called The Phantom 5. And so when I was done with that, I realized, oh, well, I can't tour on it because we're all locked down, right? So I started this midlife crisis hardcore band to go full circle back to when I was 18 with my buddy Eric, who was the engineer of that first hardcore band and ended up being the AWOL engineer. So that's kind of my vocal journey in a nutshell. And sorry for such a long-winded answer, but that's where I'm at.
No, but the history of that is very cool in terms of where you've been and really like your dedication to wanting to do music like this and having that be like the main focus of your life and like taking it in one direction and taking it in another. And I can relate to that a lot, kind of within my own life, musically, feeling like it took a while to figure out like what was that path going to be, like in one direction or another. Like, what do people want, audiences want, like my own friends and family around me, kind of thing. And when you hit that kind of screw it moment and throw all of it into one thing and be kind of unapologetically yourself, that's a really cool thing. And now to have the Barbarians of California and the ability to really go full tilt into what that raw and aggressive feel that you very clearly still have and let that out, that's a really cool thing. And actually what you said leads me into another interesting question I had about what the working relationship with Eric Stedman is like, especially knowing that you two work on so many different things musically together. I thought this was really interesting. What is the process of you two being the same two people working on something for the Barbarians of California versus all of these other things that you do? And do you kind of predetermine ahead of time, okay, let's work on something for this project or that one? Or do you just write and kind of assign it after the fact?
I think the latter.
Yeah.
Whatever I feel like doing is kind of what we end up doing, you know? So, you know, with the AWOL stuff, like I just finished a record cycle, and so I'm more focused on Barbarians right now, but I know I have all these lingering ideas that seem important to me to develop down the line in a couple songs. But, you know, 5 albums is a lot to me. And I can't really name too many artists who have more than 5 albums that are good. Right. I mean, you know, Metallica, maybe Slayer, kind of, you know, and like, you know, I don't know. Nirvana had 3 technically, or 4 really, you know. So anyways, I just feel very proud of the amount of songs AWOL has released in the album. So whether it's a full record, you know, in a year or so, or just a couple singles, I won't abandon that family or that world. But I think it's time for a pause as far as the traditional record cycle, perhaps. So that gives me the room and time to focus on the Barbarians of California, which is really just a passion project, and people seem to be enjoying it enough for it to become a real thing. When we originally started it, it was just, what if we played a show? You know, and Eric, I'm bringing Eric out of retirement. He's like, oh my God, like, and the goofy things that are kind of Spinal Tap, like, well, what are you gonna wear?
Yeah,
because he spent 10 years saying, I'm so glad I don't have to think about that kind of bullshit, you know.
yeah,
For your job, okay, I have to wear this, I'm gonna sweat, and this is, you know. So we often joke about that, but to answer your question, kind of whatever feels right at the time. And you know, I got some tricks up my sleeve for the AWOL stuff in the future, and a couple songs I would love to release perhaps next year. You know, somewhere in the middle there. But whatever seems most important right now, we have a bunch of momentum, and the second single off this next record, which I haven't totally landed on the title of the album just yet. I have some ideas. The second song, first one was Modern Passion, that came out while we were on Deftones tour, and then the follow-up single features Keith Buckley from Every Time I Die and Many Eyes, of course. And you know, since we released the first song, Dopamine Prophecy, we've been compared a lot to Every Time I Die. You know, that was and I wasn't totally familiar with all their songs. I'd heard a few things and I really liked them, but I could see why people would say that. And I could hear similarities in our voices, similar range, and notes were sort of hitting within our screams. And I became friends with Keith recently, and Many Eyes seems, their new music is really cool to me, and Better Lovers are great too. I don't know, I always say this, I don't know anything about the drama of the breakup at all. I just know that all of it's good to me, you know. And anyway, so Keith is on a song, and it's very fitting because we've been compared to them since day one. And that comes out, I want to say October 21st. And then we have our show at the Roxy on November 10th, the day before my birthday, the day after Eric's birthday, and I think a few days after Keith's birthday, weirdly. And Many Eyes is playing as well. In addition to 7D, Tim Comerford, the bass player of Audio Slave and Rage Against the Machine.
Yeah.
And it's a two-piece. It's kind of got this like really prog cool thing to it. Tim's a dear friend of mine, and I can't wait to see that. And then a local band called Lock Slip, which is really cool. And so sorry to go on promoting that show, but it's going to be a special event.
No, that's why we're here. And that's so sick to kind of hear in your own words, like the excitement around that, especially with it being such like a crazy compound kind of birthday extravaganza too. That's really,
So if you don't come to the show, I take offense. But all kidding aside, I haven't cared about my own birthday in many, many years, especially since I became a dad. It just doesn't exist anymore.
well, that'll be a really cool way to ring in that year and really put on display a lot of really cool stuff within like the whole sphere that you guys are from too, with lots of friends and lots of new faces. And with that in mind, when it comes to knowing how important like what music in California has been to you, how would you say like maybe like the scene, not even just for hardcore, but even like music in general within California, in your opinion, differs from other places? And what do you think makes it so special?
I think by default, geographically being so close to the ocean is a big part of that. So you would have, very California sounding punk rock music that was really available to see when I was in high school. And then that sort of, for me at least, passed the baton to hardcore, which is to me the underground of punk rock. And it's so interesting now with Barbarians stuff to talk to some of my buddies who weren't around for that, like newer friends who were perhaps much younger than myself. And they often say, well, what the hell is hardcore? I don't get it. Isn't it just metal? And it's confusing. You just kind of know or you don't, stylistically. But I was lucky to grow up at a time where I think hardcore was definitely in a really good spot, and it's in a great spot now as well. I think it comes in cycles. But to answer your question directly, what's so cool, or what was so cool about growing up in Southern California, is you could go, if you have the gas money to fill up the tank, you could kind of go see a show anytime. That's changed. And now LA is like, kind of a weird spot to go see a show. People don't want to go there as much as they used to. But we would drive anywhere from 2 to 5 hours to go see a show. So growing up in the boring suburbs of Westlake, 45-minute drive to get to Hollywood, further to get to San Diego, of course, or Corona, where they had the Showcase Theater, where I got to see Refused for the first time, before The Shape of Punk to Come, or all these other bands, or even drive up north to Santa Cruz, San Francisco. And so within California, there's so many different places and tentacles you can go discover new music, and we would do just that.
That's awesome. And just kind of knowing that spirit is in some ways in a lot of places kind of coming back, and kind of like you said, hardcore is in like a really cool spot right now with like where we are in the cycle of things. It must be a cool time to be able to present this new project with the Barbarians of California now to the world. And speaking of the presentation and just comparisons to other things, I've really liked all of the song names very specifically that you guys have used, like things like No Sir, I Will Not Wear Your Jacket, which I think is probably up there in terms of like favorites on that record for me. Where does that kind of come from, and why do you think it's important to have songs that do have this kind of strength and power and yet still kind of letting it be fun?
Yeah, thanks for noticing. I mean, I'm having a lot of fun with it. And I've always felt like, at least as I see it, with really heavy, brutal music, I don't really need any more satanic visuals for that. It already feels so dark and heavy. Yeah. So I'm coming at it from a sarcastic angle, and I love the Dead Kennedys coming up, or more playful punk rock bands or hardcore bands, a lot, because we're already taking ourselves pretty seriously by playing these physical songs. So if I could add an element of humor or sarcasm, that can be taken seriously, or, you know, for people who notice, like yourself, you know, can identify that I'm poking fun kind of mostly at myself, really, um, then I feel like that's a victory. So if you hate the band, that's okay because I'm already punking myself, right? And if you love it, then it becomes serious. In fact, the next song with Keith is called Pseudo Intellectuals Are Hating on My Band, in parentheses, Pure Power. And you'll see why when you hear the song, you know? Because I just envision these guys sipping on their IPA or whatever, which is something I address in that song you just mentioned, going like, who does this guy think he is? Fuck this shit, you know, this is the AWOL sale guy or whatever. And that's great, you know? So we're just having fun as much as we can.
Yeah, and I think that's so valuable, and I think it brings such a cool energy to it, because it definitely gets easy within like heavier music, whether it's hardcore or metal or anything in between, like for stuff to just be so serious all the time. At a certain point, it can feel like, well, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So that's cool, and I appreciate just like the full comeback of the added like parentheses additional title to songs.
Yeah.
That's great. And stuff like that in mind when it comes to like letting yourself have fun and kind of not holding back. How would, because we talked a little bit about like with you and your producer, kind of how this kind of varies sometimes. For you, I guess when you feel like you're in that headspace writing a Barbarians of California idea, how would you say like the way you write and what your ideas are with this differ from your other interests and your other projects?
Well, with the other stuff, it's kind of all comes from me. Whether it's the music or the melody or the lyric or the beat, it's all my thing. And then I'll have these other gentlemen play on top of it. You know, my guitar player, Zach, who's also in the Barbarians, he's so good. I'll have him take one of my very simple ideas with AWOL and to another level. But, you know, it all starts and ends with me there. A lot more weight on my shoulders. Where in Barbarians, you know, Eric will show me, hey, here's 10 riffs. Do you like any of them? And I go, riff number 3, I like a lot. I don't like the second part as much as the first part. So let's take the first part and write something different that maybe goes like this. And I'll sing something to him and he goes, okay. And then he'll interpret that and it'll come out completely different than I had heard in my head, but it'll be even cooler. So it's more of a collaboration. Or whether, you know, a song like The Library, Zach came up with that tapping riff to start it. And then I came up with the crazy, you know, palm muting part, which was funny because I said, okay, do this rhythm. He's like, that's too fast. I'm like, no, it's not too fast. You could do it. And he didn't think he could. And then of course he could. So there's a lot of pushing of boundaries here because these musicians are so elite that I could say like, you can do better. So again, AWOL's all me, and with Barbarians, it's more of a collective art project. And I'm just kind of, you know, like I have these cheat codes of this video game, you know, I'm playing with a lot, you know, with 100 lives or whatever, infinite lives like Contra.
That's awesome. And I can definitely relay. And when you do have kind of the gift to be able to work with like really truly gifted people like that, I think it is kind of your responsibility to not settle for what like a first idea is and really just like push the boundary of things. And you can really hear listening through this music that it's a group of people that really are kind of pushing things to the limit and pushing each other to be better, which is really cool. And speaking of what that limit can feel like sometimes and like what the comfort zone feels like, because I thought it was interesting because I can relate to this because I also was primarily someone that screamed before really taking singing seriously at all. I also kind of lived that a bit backwards. So for you, like writing these ideas, getting in the booth, and then getting on stage and doing it this way, did it almost like physically feel like a return home? Or did it like take some getting used to kind of sitting in way more of that like very fast-paced, high-energy screaming pocket?
I would say both. In a lot of ways, it felt like, you know, returning home or, you know, putting on an old pair of jeans that still fits.
Yeah.
But I still got it, you know, and very natural to be that aggressive because I love music so much, and I'm so passionate about it that taking this all the way, you know, to the edge and back feels very natural to me. Where with AWOL, some of the melody is very, more tender, let's say.
Mhm.
So, with that journey, doing a lot of the high pressure situations, whether it's playing like a Coachella or playing like a late night show under the microscope, was absolutely terrifying. I've gotten used to it over the years, but then, kind of taking the gloves off and getting back into screaming, was very comfortable. That being said, I hadn't done it for that long in years, because with AWOL, if I did scream like this, it was only briefly, just a yelp here or there,
Mhm.
and then go back to singing something more melodic. But over the years we played. I was lucky that AWOL has been. We played with Metallica, we played with Slayer, but we've also played with Miley Cyrus. I mean, it's been everything in between, especially in Europe. But when we would play, we would usually lean a little heavier because we all came from heavier music. So I did have years of training, and experience in playing heavier stuff. Oftentimes, I talk to a drunk person after a show or whatever, and they'd say, "You should make a hardcore band, man. You guys really are way heavier live than you are on record. Lean into that." And while I do appreciate that, you make your album and then you can't help but flex. I mean, even the Barbarian stuff is heavier live than it is on record, of
Yeah.
course. That's the goal always. So once we started this, I thought there's a good chance I'll be able to do this. But some of the vocals are just so gosh dang extreme. I'm not thinking, can I pull this off live? I'm thinking, fuck that, live in the now, do the craziest thing that's ever been heard, and then
Yeah.
figure it out later. And so I have had to learn, a few techniques. And the cool thing with Barbarians and the Deftones tour we just did is that no one knew who we were. So I could just stop singing a verse and it doesn't matter. This is more of a spectacle. It's more sarcastic, as we covered, and more fun. And so I'm kind of this circus ringleader during these shows, to keep it entertaining and interesting and express this connectivity with, highly energetic music. So, it doesn't matter as much if I just don't sing a part. Where AWOL, these people are coming to hear that lyric specifically, of that song.
Yeah, and especially depending on like the performance style, the kind of world of music. I feel like I agree with you in some cases, like what you're doing on stage and what parts you're choosing to do is kind of equally as important as which parts you aren't doing, and like that interaction and that ability to just make it organic and natural. And that in mind, when it comes to like what you have done with this project, the Barbarians of California, and being able to take it to the streets and do it day in and day out, as opposed to like the singular takes in the studio, do you feel like now that you've done it at such a larger scale and it's starting to come more and more and very clearly, because it seems like things for the Barbarians of California isn't going to stop, do you think you've kind of discovered more things about yourself and more about your voice and what you're capable of through this?
Not necessarily. I mean, this has been a fire burning my whole life, and so it's always there. It's kind of it's the passion I keep talking about, and I guess I'm just very pleased that I didn't lose my voice after the first show.
For sure.
Because in some ways, I'll say I know this is about vocals in a lot of ways, and screaming full on is less strenuous on my voice than yelling at the top of my range. In other words,
Yeah.
the full scream, like at like a song like Bazooka, for anyone who's heard this song, like that's actually less straining than me coming out on the stage and saying, "Hey everybody, let's have a good time," and trying to yell at the crowd to get them hyped. And so I have learned over the years that the bigger the crowd doesn't mean that you have to yell louder. The PA system works, but my voice is loud as hell, so that's the problem, and it's hard for me to tame the passion. I'm trying to find a more colorful word than just passion that I keep repeating, but it is what it is.
I mean, that illustrates it pretty perfectly, and you bring up a really great point that I think, because, like, of course, I love to talk about, like, all of the aspects of what we do here that aren't necessarily just, like, the physical thing happening, but a lot of our viewers, I think, will be really happy to hear that, especially because it's a really good thing that you've found that balance in terms of the screaming isn't going to necessarily feel or be nearly as intense as even just like the interacting with the crowd in between different songs. And I'm glad you were able to find your way there and find a balance that worked for you, that's enabled you to kind of just let loose and have fun with what touring has meant so far. And with where it's coming from for you, it's really cool to hear how honest the whole thing is. Like, that's really cool. And to wrap things up with a bow here, what does honesty in music, just in general, kind of mean to you? Especially being someone that clearly just loves music as a whole.
It's a foundational piece to everything I do, or at least attempt to. If I write a song with any of these projects and down the line, one of the lyrics feels a bit cringe or whatever, feels like I was forcing it and didn't take enough time, I'll regret that and want to move on and not make that same mistake. But I'd like to think, not to be so like, virtue signal lyrically here necessarily, but I'd like to think that the stuff that I'm doing is very honest for me. And especially with the heavier stuff, there are a few moments where, because there's so many different, styles of screams, right? There's the lower scream, there's the higher scream, and I just want it to always sound like I'm almost dying. My favorite screamers are the ones that sound like they're so fucking mad and passionate that they're gonna faint. And I get that with Zach De La Roca. I get that with the singer of Undertow, John Pettibone. I get that with Keith, quite honestly. Keith Buckley. I got that with Kurt Cobain. And I hope people take that away with me, with some of these vocal takes, that they're like, okay, this guy really means what he's saying, even if it's a bit sarcastic. The attitude and the passion is there.
And I think that will definitely take this project and what you're doing with this, Aaron, really, really far. And that being said, I'm really excited to hear where that honesty takes you with future songs like this one coming up with Keith and anything else coming down the pipeline. And I think you've got a really cool thing going. I think you have an awesome group of people around you making it sound truly sick. And I'm really excited to see where it goes. And I'm looking forward to catch this monster in person when I can. And thanks so much for sitting down and talking with me a bit about it today. It's all these things happening is really awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that being said, we can end our episode there. And I really appreciate all the transparency and just kind of the truthfulness to like so much of what like your story has been and what these things mean to you and the way you go about it. I think all the people that like look to us for these sorts of things to like find inspiration, and all the people that like feel that kind of bug within themselves to like go out and do this thing, like if music is as important to them as it is to like someone like you or someone like me, I think it'll be really cool for them to hear what you've had to say.
I would finish by just saying to not ever take yourself too seriously, because at the end of the day, we're playing music. And so if you get to play for a living, you're playing with house money, so try to not. And also Spinal Tap is real. I didn't see the second one, but Spinal Tap is real.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yes, and that's a really good place to end things. And Aaron, so thanks so much again for sitting down with me here on Behind the Screams. Real nice to meet you officially here too. Very awesome, and you have a great rest of your day over there.
You too, brother. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye. Such cool answers to my questions, so much great insight into being an artist and being in a band, and so many other amazing things that I got to talk about with Aaron Bruno in this episode. Thank you all for watching. I had such a great time with Aaron. I hope you enjoyed watching. And when it comes to something interesting to talk about here at the end, and something that I think I could teach you all today, I'm going to quote something that I talked about with Aaron in terms of how he gets to this level of I'm going to say, exasperation and intensity within the energy that he uses with his vocals, both recorded and live. And he said something that stuck with me, where he just wanted it to like sound like he's dying at different points, or just have that really extreme, like, oh, like big life or death reaction to something, and hearing that translate through the music. And a big part of when we're recording songs or when we're performing live, it's really important to try to figure out how to get the kind of intensity and energy you want out of it without necessarily taking it out on yourself. As I talk about a lot at Extreme Vocal Institute and as a vocal coach, there are a lot of times where people do get a bit thrashed and a bit hurt vocally over time because of trying to keep that authenticity there and trying to keep it real, more or less. And there are ways to be able to get that same level of authenticity within that energy without having to sacrifice your own well-being in order to do so. And this really does come down to, if you can walk the walk, you can very literally talk the talk. Let me explain. So much of how we sound and how we're speaking, even me speaking to all of you now, has to do with my body language. I'm inviting you all into a conversation. I'm excited about what I'm talking about, and I'm going to show you all how to do something. So the way I'm carrying myself, the way I'm moving, the way I'm saying my words, how I'm moving throughout my voice, the way I'm moving my body, even in my hands, is all contributing to the way my voice sounds. Because if I take all of that inflection and energy of the body away, I sound a lot less enthusiastic about what I'm talking about, and there isn't as much of an inviting tone there. And I can put that all in here when I'm speaking to you all. And when it comes to that kind of almost gritting through your teeth intensity that a scream can have, let's start with a fry scream bass. If I get that vocal fry ready in my voice, and then start to play around with what that kind of exasperation looks like. If I'm gritting through my teeth, I'm going to start to make a different kind of face. If my body's kind of getting involved, if I'm thinking about someone being either really upset or angry or just emotional in general, it's this very wound up and yet also explosive kind of feeling and kind of visual. When I bring these ideas together with that vocal fry, if I start to talk like that, gritting through my teeth and digging into my voice a little bit, you can already hear some of that intensity coming through. If I really start to lean in, I kind of act out the part enough and well enough where some of that natural projection starts to come in. When I add that fry feeling, you can hear that almost sense of desperation, I'll say, behind the sound, and in how much distortion is happening and in the way it's being channeled out of my body and out of my face here. And if I were to do all of that very neutrally, there, of course, is distortion still there, but without that inflection, without playing out the idea of that intensity, it's going to sound totally different. When we're listening to bands, or even if we're seeing bands live, and this isn't to knock anywhere in particular, but when someone is just very stationary or just very still and very much doing everything in kind of a straight line, very often for a listener or an audience on average, it is a lot more difficult to kind of get into it when it comes to these kinds of things, because we can hear that there's a little bit of a lack of expression sometimes, whether that be in the studio or live or both. And sometimes those bands don't go as far or connect with as many people because there isn't as much to connect with as much as there is to just hear in general. That's the weird thing about vocals here. And even though we're talking about like screaming sounds and yells and hollers like this and so many unusual sounds that when you take them out of the context of the songs, they are inherently a bit silly. But when it does come to letting yourself kind of, again, like we talked about in this interview, embrace the honesty behind what this kind of music is and what this whole art form is, really, like in a bigger sense, It's about letting that expression come from a real place, really portraying that feeling, but not necessarily having to actually be in the middle of that feeling. Like if your songs are coming from somewhere very real and organic, from like an upset place or a sad place or an angry place, you don't have to necessarily fully relive whatever that song is about in order to feel like you're actually doing it justice when you're performing it for an album or in front of people live. If you can walk the walk, if you can portray that feeling, act that out, think about what that looks like, the kind of movement behind that, speak those words with that kind of purpose, you'll find that your pronunciation will shift a little bit, your body language is going to naturally shift, the way you're carrying yourself, the way you're literally walking around, walking the walk, you will very literally sound exactly that level of whatever it is you're after that you want, because that will quite literally set you up to be able to talk the talk. And that's something I want all of you here to experiment with, all of you vocalists out there at least watching. And for anyone that's just a fan of this art form, I hope that gives you some really cool insight as to what we're thinking about and how artists and vocalists feel when it comes to how are we crafting these songs, how are we laying them down for you all to hear, and how do we bring that to you in person and share that experience when it's all of us in the room together. And I think that's always really interesting to think about, talk about, experience, and why I'm so glad I was able to have such a cool conversation with Aaron Bruno here from the Barbarians of California. If there are any other artists you want to see here on the Behind the Screams podcast, definitely leave a comment or let us know somewhere on any of our socials. We're always listening, always watching out for your recommendations, and I'm always so happy to have people here on the podcast to talk about these amazing things and what makes what we're doing here truly great. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm David from Behind the Screams podcast, and I'll catch you all later.